I'm Shannon with the Game on Glio podcast, and today I am sitting down with three remarkable and transformational individuals from Imvax Incorporated. John Fury is the CEO of Imvax, and he specifically came out of retirement to take on becoming CEO at Imvax Incorporated headquarters. We also sit down with Mark Exley, who is the Chief Scientific Officer, and he explains to us a little bit about Goldspire platform. And last but not least, we sit down with the co-founder and the Chief Medical Officer, David Andrews. Together, these three men explain to us the importance of the work that Imvax is doing and their current clinical trial, IGV-001. So let's dive right in. John, specifically, why did you come out of retirement to join Imvax as its CEO?
I did retire from Spark Therapeutics after the acquisition by Roche, and the chairman of Spark Therapeutics was a gentleman called Dr. Stephen Altschuler. He called me in July of 2019 and said, "Well, are you bored yet?" And I said, "Well, let's talk." So he said he had made an investment in a very interesting company called Imvax, which had been a spin-out from Thomas Jefferson University. And he asked me to come down and just help out as an advisor in the initial stages of the company. So I went down, and actually I was really intrigued with the company. It was 5 people in a rented office, and Dr. David Andrews, who's the medical founder of the company, had just presented at AACR in April some really compelling data from a phase 1b study that he had conducted in Jefferson. Clearly, David and Art, the co-founders, and Peter Core, our chairman, were all good people and really focused on the right things, which is advancing care for patients in a disease for which there was an absolute need for an improvement in standard of care. And the second criteria had to be good science. And it was very intriguing. The approach that we're taking is orthogonal. It's not a classical approach to treating a cancer. And what we do know from glioblastoma, but maybe the traditional approaches don't work, and it's going to need something as unique as the way in which we utilize the mechanism of action. David is a phenomenal neurosurgeon, phenomenal academic. He had come up with something wonderful, but it did need folk like myself with an industry, a drug development background to come in and take that wonderful data and that approach that David had developed and take it to the next level. By September, I had agreed to come on board as CEO. I have not regretted that. We're coming up on 4 years. A phenomenal journey, and we've radically transformed the company. So I've enjoyed it, and it's always helpful that you have a mission that is really meaningful to patients. And so that's the genesis of the company and my involvement, at least, in it.
What is the importance of the work that Imvax is doing and its focus on glioblastoma?
The founder of the company was a neurosurgeon, so really it came from David's passion and interest. The rest of us just joined in behind, right, to make that a reality. And then I saw the data from the phase 1b, and we recognize it's a one institution study, non-randomized, but there were enough patients and enough signal to say that there is something unique going on in terms of the approach that David was taking across 33 patients in the phase 1b. And, that manifested itself when I saw, particularly in some of the patients where, we isolated down to being STUB eligible patients, we saw a 2 to 3-fold improvement in survival, progression-free survival, and it continues actually through to 5-year survival of almost a 2 to 3-fold improvement over standard of care in that phase 1b. So that's a very profound signal. Over the period of time, we've grown from 5 people in a rented office to 50 people. We have a fully integrated biotech company now. We have our own basic research, which has allowed us to really get a very good understanding of the mechanism of action, has allowed us to actually advance the preclinical work into other cancers. We have also developed a clinical and development team as well. And obviously, we've developed a full manufacturing capability across manufacturing, quality, process development. So we've really matured out.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Can you explain to us a little bit about the Gold Spire platform and how it works?
So it's an approach which is based on clinical data, which is always the most exciting way for me, as well as for David, to work, of course, rather than starting with mouse work or lab work and so on. And it takes the patient's tumor cells and uses them against the tumor to stimulate a stronger immune response. The tumor cells are encapsulated in little biodiffusion chambers. Actually, I might even show you one right here. It is pretty small. You can see it there. So we do use 20 of those in each patient, but those contain the tumor cells and a component called an antisense molecule, which helps to activate the immune response. And it's targeting a known tumor driver, so it makes sense. The combination of these two, which are implanted only briefly in the patient's abdomen, stimulates an immune response locally, away from the tumor, because that's a real advantage, because the tumor is very immunosuppressive. One of the ways that tumors grow in general, especially GBM. So if we try to stimulate an immune response from the near the primary tumor, it's very difficult. But if you go a long way away, as we do in the abdomen, physiologically a completely different set of lymph nodes that are involved, you're more likely to generate a good response there, which can then go locally and then become systemic. And so that's the results. I saw the early clinical data, and that was what compelled me to join Imvax, based on David's earlier clinical work, and we've been working towards the phase 2 now.
Explain the IGV-001 clinical trial and how it works in GBM.
It's an autologous cell treatment. You're probably familiar with other autologous strategies, including CAR T cells or dendritic cells, or sometimes even allogeneic cells. So human, but not the same person. This is unique in that it is autologous, but as Mark pointed out, it's a preparation that we can turn around in 24 to 48 hours. So we take living glioblastoma cells, we process them in a particular way. We encapsulate them, as Mark showed you, in those tiny diffusion chambers with a 100 nanometer exclusion limit. We create a pocket between the sheath and the muscle, and then do a temporary closure and then reopen it for the implant days later. But as far as the immune system that Mark's talking about, there's the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system. So making an incision in the abdomen certainly stirs the interest of the innate immune system further with implantation of a foreign body, out of which is diffusing the full antigenic payload of that particular tumor. So we charge the chamber with the antisense molecule. So the antisense molecule is pushing these tumor cells towards what's called an immunogenic cell death. It's a regulated cell death. The radiation adds to that, moving the cells through that process and actually going through an immunogenic cell death just within that 48-hour period of implantation. There's not a living cell left in the chamber, so the whole process is completed in 48 hours. The patient then is discharged, and of course, we proceed with adjuvant treatment, which you're quite familiar with, 42 days later.
What's the importance of a placebo-controlled design?
The phase 1 original trial was done unblinded, because that was just to look to see if there was a signal, basically. And we saw this impressive signal, but it doesn't prove it definitively. And that's where the phase 2 comes in. And as I say, there's no downside to being enrolled from the patient's perspective. They're getting the standard of care anyway, but they have a 2-to-1 chance of being treated with this experimental treatment, which of course we can't guarantee is going to benefit, but is hopefully going to benefit many patients. So really, it's the way of proving conclusively for all patients and benefit of all patients in the future as well, whether or not this treatment is worth going through. And It also allows us to potentially, get approval from the FDA if it was to work without any, say, caveats about whether or not the results were definitive.
So exactly how do patients in the trial benefit from IGV-001?
So it is a very safe intervention. The incisions in the abdomen are very well tolerated. Patients go home, the day after explant, really with no issues. So to your more important question, we are anticipating a much longer period of time where there's no tumor coming back. So progression-free survival. Of course, the FDA is most interested, as is the case for all clinical trials, in overall survival. There are many more variables involved in what makes an overall survival outcome, because certainly after recurrence, there really is no standard of care. So there are a lot of, actually, most of the current trials that are open are dealing with recurrent disease because there's really no standard treatment. In the 1B trial, we had over a 90% correlation between PFS and OS, which is really quite amazing. Progression-free survival and then overall survival. So the longer that interval is between the initial craniotomy and then this treatment, and the time to progression is ultimately that event. When we get 55 such events, we will unblind and we'll have a look at overall survival at that point.
John, what is your hope for Imvax in the next few years?
Progression-free survival is our primary endpoint, but we have a very significant secondary endpoint in overall survival, which we believe is meaningful to the agency as well. And we have a number of other secondary endpoints which will be supportive of characterizing the patient benefit. So, we're recruiting at the moment. Obviously, we're anxiously looking for participation, and we think we provide a real option for patients that are presenting today with newly diagnosed glioblastoma. We're in up to 20 sites across the eastern seaboard and into the eastern part of the central time zone, which is about 1,000 miles from our manufacturing center. And we're recruiting well at the moment. And we'd like to have the trial completed, and we expect to have the trial completed in the first half of next year. It will take us about 12, 15 months from that point to get the early readout on progression-free survival. So we expect to see probably in mid-2025, what separation are we seeing between the placebo and the intervention group. So for us, for the next 2 years, it's really prosecuting the trial, getting patients enrolled, and tracking and following those patients to the progression-free survival signal mid-2025. Ultimately, we'll have to see where the data goes, right? So if the data, we're looking at essentially a doubling of progression-free survival as the primary endpoint, which is significant in itself. And at that point, then we have to address it with the agency and see what the totality of the data is. The agency, they will take into consideration it's a rare oncological disorder. They will take into consideration the fact that there probably hasn't been a significant improvement in standard of care or survival for patients in almost 2 decades. So there are possibilities the agency could look favorably on it for a conditional approval, but only time will tell. And if that's the case, then we would be looking to launch the product at some point in late 26. Early 27, if the data is supportive of a conditional approval. So that's kind of the timelines in which we're optimistically looking at the development of the company and where we can go with this. But it's all data-driven, and that's one of the essential pieces of drug development, right?
I want to thank all of you so much for joining us and listening to the inspirational messaging and the education of these 3 individuals and the work that is being done over at Imvax. You can learn more about the work that they're doing at Imvax.com. You can follow them on LinkedIn. You can also join us at the GameOnGlioPodcast.com, where we have the bio for Imvax, and we are always updating the information for the clinical trial that they're currently recruiting for. You can also hear their messaging and their commercial on any one of our episodes, as they are one of our premier sponsors for our 3rd season of the Game on Glio podcast. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching this, and we will see you again soon.